Hello and welcome to Season 3, Episode 15. My name is Tom. This is The Enthusiasm Project, and today we're gonna be authentically authentic because this is something that I think is incredibly important for anybody who creates, well, really anything, but especially looking in the realm of like YouTube and podcasts, which is kind of where I spend a lot of my time. And from what I've gotten to know, a lot of those of you who listen to this show, that's also where you spend a lot of your time too, creating your own stuff on YouTube or podcasts or both. Podcasts on YouTube. I was going to try to go further with that, but I guess I can't. So what I wanted to emphasize today was kind of that importance of authenticity. We talked about it last week when I was having the whole roundtable discussion with Heather and Dan and Kevin, and we were talking about choosing your platform and why to create on something. If you haven't heard last week's episode, I'd strongly recommend you go back and check it out. It was really fun. It came out great, and there's a lot of cool perspectives from different people who, we're all creating stuff, but for different reasons in different ways, totally different journeys. And I think that highlights a big thing that I want to cover today, which is how different the same concept can be for everybody. So if you have a YouTube channel and I have a YouTube channel, our YouTube journeys are going to be very different. Even though there's some similarities, I'm sure we could sit down and like talk about, oh, how about this? How about this? Or we could commiserate about something, or those sorts of similar experiences, but it's also like the reason you want to get started, how you're building, how you're growing, what your priorities are, or your priority is with whatever it is that you're making. That stuff it's so different. Like I've been getting so many messages and comments from people on any videos I have to do with podcasting, especially with Anchor. Like if I talk about Anchor and they ask about monetization, how much money do you make? How do you get paid? How do you do this? I'm like, I don't really know. I've made $0 ever on any podcast. So it's not that it wouldn't be possible. I mean, heck, Anchor lets you monetize right away. I could put an ad in this show, which I'm not doing today, but you could get your own sponsor. You could sell merch, I guess. I mean, if you've heard podcasts, you've heard the infinite ways that people tend to monetize them, but that's just not something that I am interested in doing. But for other people, that's a big part of what they want to do and what's going to enable them to keep doing it into the future. So even though we're doing the same thing, we're working on the same basic idea of like creating and distributing a podcast, the approach and the purpose behind it is very, very different. And I'm fascinated by that. And I think it's just something to keep in mind as you're listening to, like a YouTube expert, because I've also been sort of noticing this over the past few months as Heather has been kind of rebuilding the way that she's approaching how she does like her YouTube coaching, which is basically her full-time like job at this point. And the thing that she noticed, which then I noticed because I'm just like the parrot on her shoulder as she does these things, but the world of YouTube coaching is so focused on growth. Get this many subscribers this fast, get this many views, make this much money, grow 10 times this, do this one thing, 5 tips for growth, that kind of stuff. And what Heather's interested in is much more of you have something to express, something to share, use this very awesome platform as a way to build your corner of the internet and create what you want within that, how you want to do it. And that is an entirely different approach, but there's room for both because people approach, the platform and the process from both ways, from both directions. And that to me is just so interesting how, different people can use the same things just with you just sort of have different approaches towards it. And that's kind of where I wanted to hit in today. I'm not going to judge anybody's approach. At this point, if you've listened to this podcast long enough, you probably know how I feel about ads and sponsored stuff, and that I'm not against it. I'm just hesitant to incorporate a lot of it. But there are some people who do a lot of it. That I'm not going to sit here and judge that, especially if somebody is finding a way to do it effectively and authentically for whatever it is they're doing. And that's what it comes down to. Just because I do my thing my way doesn't mean you can't do your thing your way. And that's one of the biggest benefits. And that's one of the coolest parts about being able to do this stuff is that everybody can kind of blaze their own trail. But what happens a lot of times is there will be people who come along who, whatever you could call them, like tastemakers, and they leave such a huge imprint on the landscape that you see that, that effect for a long time. And I've been influenced by that too, which is, Casey Neistat on YouTube. Huge reason that I finally started a channel, I should say, because I'd wanted to start a channel for a long time, but his approach made it seem more accessible and more practical than some of the other stuff I had been seeing up until that point. It didn't have to be perfect, and it could just be, you didn't have to be an expert or the best at anything. You can just sort of share your perspective in your own way, and then what was like a year or two later, Peter McKinnon showed up with his like style of doing things, and that had a very big influence, at least in my corner of like the YouTube world. That was very, prominent and noticeable. And those things happen, but the I guess the good and the bad of it is when somebody like that comes around, where essentially what they're doing is they're taking a platform and they're using it in a way that it hasn't been used before. So people had been doing vlogs before Casey did vlogs, but when he did his, not just doing them every day, but the quality and the style and the breadth of them was something totally different. It wasn't someone just sitting in front of a low resolution webcam in a badly lit room, sort of rambling. That's kind of what I'm doing right now, sort of rambling for a long period of time. It was, these really cool little movies every single day. And that sort of changed the game. But then you started seeing, as other people were influenced by that and wanted to pick up their cameras and start their things, naturally, because that was where their influence came from, that was what the stuff they were making just looked like. Myself very much included. Go back and watch like any of my first like 50 videos on my YouTube channel, and you'll see some of that inspiration in there for sure. Then Peter McKinnon showed up, and in the photo video world of YouTube, that was a big deal because he kind of brought like this level of, I don't know if we call it production value or whatever, to your video. So yes, it's a YouTube video, but it can look and feel much more like a professional level production rather than, just a YouTube video that someone filmed by themselves. And that, that also then added a new thing. And then you saw a whole bunch of people, myself included in a lot of ways, like bringing that stuff into their work. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's very normal. The danger comes when you don't expand beyond that. You have like this influence, or you see how people are doing it and you just want to do things the way that it's being done and there's no deviation from that. That's where I think it gets really dangerous for a lot of reasons, because first of all, like, someone's already done it. So why are you trying to do the thing that's already been done, done really well? And second, that might not be you. Like, I learned, I would say pretty quickly, but not very quickly, that I actually don't really like vlogging that much. It sounds fun. I love filming stuff. I love taking a camera and filming things. I've been doing that my whole life, since before there was like the internet to put video onto. I don't know what I was filming. I just take cameras everywhere, and I don't know what I would do with that footage. But the idea of like, I have to make a vlog and like film myself and talking about this, and it's just sort of my life as the subject, it doesn't work for me. But it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with it. Like, Heather's much better at that than I am. I really enjoy watching other people who are really good at it. It's just not something that fits quite right for me. But I like some of those elements. So every once in a while, I might make a video that has like a vlog style element to it. Like, I recently did one that was about how I do my like Zoom setups for school. And I kind of showed like the setup I have at work, the setup I have at home. Since all our classes are online, I sort of showed how that works. That video did really well, but also it was kind of like more vloggy. Like, it really was sort of, the camera's on a small portable tripod. I'm moving it in different places, just sort of like vloggy style, but not necessarily what you would typically consider a vlog, because it was more in like the tutorial / like studio tour realm of things. So I don't know. There's like a little variation that made me a lot more comfortable with it, but I could still kind of play around with some of those styles. And that's really, like with anything, you want to take your inspiration from somewhere and then build upon it rather than just try to emulate it. You don't want to just do what the other person is doing. But if there's bits and pieces that you like, find out what those bits and pieces are, why they appeal to you, and then take that and build upon it from there. And it's funny because sometimes you might find that your style or your it's not necessarily consistent, I should say. It happens for me a lot in terms of like design style and like colors and things, because there's a part of me that leans so much into, I really like everything being like clean and polished and like slick and minimal. If I look at something like go to Becky and Chris's YouTube channel on like a desktop, or at least in like a regular web browser where it's not the mobile app, go to their channel, click on their videos tab, and just look at all of the thumbnails. There's hundreds of them, and it's beautiful. When you look at just the color, like everything is just so perfect and on brand and like wonderful. But it's also like everything has like this dark gray, black, white, kind of almost like monochromatic color scheme to it. And it's gorgeous. And I look at something like that and I just think like, gosh, that looks so good. But then what I have noticed is that doesn't really work for me. I can do little things like that here and there. But what kind of also naturally pulls me in is a lot of like color and variety and sort of just like lots of things. Almost like, I don't want to say in a messy way, but kind of in a messy way, which is very different from the other style. And the other and that's just what kind of leans towards me. So kind of combine those things together and you get like a polished messiness, which I don't know if that's really a thing, but I think that's more accurately kind of where I fall and where I fit. And it's just something that I sort of had to accept. Like, it does look really cool when you walk into someone's studio and everything is just perfect and polished and in place, and there's, 2 colors at most being used. But it's also like, I like my room that's like super colorful and got a bunch of crazy crap on the walls, and like that also makes me feel really good. And it's just, you have to kind of lean towards even beyond just like set design or graphic design or whatever, but leaning towards the stuff that really works for you and taking these inspirations from different places is really, really, it's a very important way to grow and to maintain that authenticity. And if you're doing something like a podcast or a YouTube channel, your authenticity is really key. And that's just, like, it doesn't mean that you have to bear everything to your audience all the time. Like, here's my camera tutorial channel, but I'm struggling with this health issue right now, so let's talk about that. For like that stuff might not, of course you could do that if you want to. You can go as in-depth or as not in-depth as you choose, because that's what's authentic to you. But sometimes I think when people hear the word authenticity, that's kind of what they think, is being like ultra open and ultra candid. That's not necessarily the case, because there's just some people that aren't comfortable with that. There's stuff on my YouTube channel that I just won't ever talk about on there. There's stuff I'll talk about on this podcast that I wouldn't talk about on YouTube, even though I'm the same person. And it's just, like the context is different. The vibe, I guess, is different, whatever you want to call it. And it's okay. It's okay to have those differences, but you can still be your authentic self. And the only way you can really do that is if you're not trying to emulate someone else. You can be inspired by somebody else. You can watch a Peter McKinnon video, see high production value, and want to bring high production value to what you're doing. But it doesn't mean that everything you make has to look like his videos, or you have to act like him on camera, or you have to use the same lighting, the same equipment, the same setup. But it's just, what is at the core of it, what is it that inspired you? Bring that into what you do. Find something else that inspires you, bring that into what you do. But work on the inspiration rather than the emulation, because that's what's going to help protect your authenticity, which is very important because, at least in my opinion, in my experience, that's the thing that's going to let you be sustainable. I think if you're basically playing a character on whatever you create, that might work, but that also seems like it gets exhausting very quickly. Whereas if you're being your authentic self, I think that makes things much more sustainable. So it's not about doing, creating 3 or 4 things, doing a little run of podcast episodes or 10 videos on a channel, but it's about hundreds of those things over probably a period of years if you really want to get to a point where there's some kind of growth or some kind of momentum behind it. And it's just really tough to do that if you have to like put on this mask and be completely somebody else and act something totally different. It just doesn't, to me, it just doesn't work. And then there's always that disappointment when you meet the person and you find out that they aren't who you thought they were, which is not like an uncommon thing back in the days of where it was just like Hollywood movies and stuff. There might be a celebrity who seems really goofy and fun, and then, you know, you see them in person at a restaurant or something and they're a total jerk. That stuff happens. But I think with YouTube and podcasting, these things are so personal and they're so intimate. You know, if you're doing a corporate podcast or you're running like a corporate YouTube channel, I don't know that anyone expects like somebody from like the Home Depot YouTube channel tutorial to show up and be like, wow, it feels like I know them. But if it's just somebody's personal channel, even if it's a larger one, if it's somebody's personal podcast or something that somebody started on their own, when people listen to that or people watch that, they do start to feel a certain kind of connection and familiarity with you. And it's so easy for them to sniff that out if you meet in person, or even just if they kind of pay attention for a long time. There's several, you know, creators on different platforms where I used to really like them, and then you can kind of just do that sniff test of like something is a little off here, and then you just kind of pull away from it because what it really is that authenticity isn't there. I expect that in a Hollywood movie there might be a lack of authenticity just due to the fact that there's hundreds, if not thousands, of people involved with the production. It's not any one person's like creative thing. But when it's your channel, your podcast, at least I know I expect there to be a certain level of authenticity for me to connect to. And if I don't feel that, then I don't want to keep going. And I don't want to focus like this is all just a trick for growth, but the thing that's going to grow your project of any kind the most is having a like solid community behind it, which takes a long time to build. You know, when you're just starting a channel, you're just starting a podcast, people don't know about it yet. They're not going to see it or hear it yet. But over time, it builds, and it starts with just a couple people, and it grows and it grows. And there might even be people who are part of that community that you don't know. They're not the ones sending you messages or comments or any of that stuff, but they're there and they're constantly showing up and they're getting something out of what you're putting out. And you might never know, but that's that community. They connect with you. They maybe connect with what they're seeing other people saying and the other people around it, and kind of this whole little universe. That's what they're being a part of. And that's a really important thing. It's a pretty big responsibility when you think about it, to create something like that and to maintain something like that and to care for it over a long period of time. But that's the thing that's really going to help if you want to grow, that's what's going to help you grow. And last week when we had our roundtable, one of the things we talked about was strategy. And I mentioned that for me, one of my biggest, I don't want to call it like a regret, but sure, was that I waited too long to bring in any kind of strategy to my YouTube channel, because I thought that if I was being strategic about it, I was sacrificing authenticity, because it's cool if you're just doing whatever you want and then like your channel grows really fast, but it's not as cool if you're like wanting your channel to grow. But at the same time, like everybody, I think, wants some level of growth. Whether that's the driving factor or not is a very personal thing. But I had to learn, like, yeah, of course I want it to grow. I don't want to sacrifice the stuff that I value. I don't want to sacrifice, the people who have supported me along the way, but I want to grow along the way. And fortunately, at least in like the world where I find myself on these platforms, just being authentic is a huge way to build that community and to grow that stuff in a very like, in a shockingly effective way. And that's not manipulative, because it's not the thing where it's, I'm going to pretend to just be ultra authentic, because then people will think that it's authentic, and then there'll be a community which will help me grow, because that's like the worst. That sounds terrible, but it's much more about, okay, it's kind of a win-win, I guess. If you're authentic, that means you get to be yourself. People get to sign up for you. They don't get to sign up for something you're pretending to be. And then the thing that you're making gets to do better and better because more and more people are finding it and connecting with it because it's you and it's what you're making and you're creating. That's the thing that they're connecting to. And that's kind of the beauty of it. You don't have to be somebody else's mouthpiece, somebody else's voice. And that was, I mean, for me, that was such a huge part of starting a YouTube channel. And it will kind of go down like a memory road, like memory lane right now, because I was thinking earlier today about the kinds of videos I would make before I had a YouTube channel, which, you know, as a kid, when I'm younger, it was a lot of just whatever I wanted. It didn't matter. We'd make an animation, make a little movie, make a music video, whatever. Nobody saw them. Doesn't matter. It was more about making it. But then going into more adulthood, it was a lot more client work. And if I started my channel in 2017, for 4 to 5 years before that, the main types of videos I made were like, I guess what you could really kind of call corporate videos, they were mainly for the schools and school districts that I worked for. And it was just like promotional pieces, you know, like here's a technology initiative that's happening in the school district. Here's an arts program that's happening at this school. Here's, you know, a recruitment video. So this high school can send this video to a middle school and get students psyched to go to that school and sign up for its specialized programs, those kinds of things. And those can be like really fun to make, especially because I get to work with my students on a lot of them. But they're not like the most exciting videos in the world. The most exciting thing about those videos is when you might get to film something that looks really cool, or, you know, shoot an interview that looks and sounds really good, or edit something or design something that's really nice. But the finished product is pretty boring. And I'm sorry, you know, to anybody who might be listening that worked on these with, they're not the most exciting projects in the world. You know, no one's going to sit down on their weekend and be like, I got to watch that school district 50th anniversary video. It's a great thing. It's a cool thing to have, but it's not connecting with people in the same way that like a YouTube video would. But it's great experience because I would normally work on these projects with my students, and I would try to have students do as much as possible. So if we're like doing an event or something, you know, they would have cameras, audio gear. I'd kind of help them navigate the world of asking people for interviews, how to interview people, setting it up, dealing with lighting, all the tech stuff. But they would feel so good when they film something and they're like, this looks so good and it sounds so good. You know, that was very gratifying. And then trying to edit it together, I would always kind of be in the background, like recording like safety footage just in case something went wrong. But then it would kind of come down to me, just because these things usually were going out into the community, or they were going somewhere where they needed to be produced at a different level than most students are capable of. And that's just because students are usually learning. Fortunately, I will say now, over the past few years, I've gotten a lot more into, hey, maybe I don't need another one of these projects on my plate, but I can find a good group of students now that my program has grown and my students have gotten more skilled. I can literally like find them, sort of brief them on what they need, connect them with the other person, and then I can step away, and they are the ones that have to navigate this thing. And sometimes that's bad because it doesn't work out because they are just students. But when it works out, it's so much more beneficial. They learn how to communicate with adults, how to work with clients, how to create the things, how to deal with revisions. And I don't have to do any of it, which is terrific. I'm just there kind of enabling it in the background. Whereas prior, a lot of it was, and like I just had like 3 thoughts at once. And the reason for that shift, I guess I'll be very candid, is when I work on those projects, it requires a lot of extra time. And what I've been learning over the past few years, even in an ideal work situation, if you're working for somebody else, you are working for somebody else. The stuff that you're making belongs to somebody else. It benefits somebody else. Even if you might benefit a little bit from it, it's somebody else's thing. And that's never going to be the same as you putting your energy towards your own thing. And so a couple of years ago, I kind of made the very active decision as much as I could to consciously not put extra effort into somebody else's thing. So during the hours, my contracted work hours, I will give 110%, do as much as I can, all that stuff. But as soon as those hours end, no, not an extra calorie will be burned to do any of that stuff, because any of that energy I want to pour into my own thing where I am in control and maintain it and benefit from it and am the one who is in charge of it. Somebody else can't take it away or change it or whatever. It's my thing. And that's to me like one of the biggest benefits of these platforms. Maybe it's because I'm also an only child. I just sat here for like 2 minutes talking about mine. But that I just don't like it when when somebody else takes ownership over something you've put your time and energy into. But when you're doing any type of client type work, I mean, that is something that's happening. You're working with clients. That can be very fun, but it's also you're creating somebody else's vision. It's not necessarily your vision. And so the way that one of these projects would typically play out would be usually over a 3 or 4 month period. It would start with like, this is what's happening. We want to make a video that shows, this technology initiative throughout the school district. Do you have students who can help with that? Sure. And I'd find 3 or 4 students. We'd kind of work out. And then over the next, month, we'd sort of plan things out. Usually it would involve having to go places to film things and interviews and that stuff. Then we'd, have a couple days of filming. And then there'd be this whole editing process where typically, like the way that it would work out is students would edit versions, but I would kind of like edit the real version, just because it needed to be done that way, at least at the time. And then that would usually include like 3 or 4 revisions. And by the time you're done with that, it's about 4 months. You've created this thing, which usually looked and sounded really good. I'm proud of them as like projects, and people were happy with them and they served their purpose. But it wasn't something where I was like artistically fulfilled. And it definitely wasn't something where I felt like, wow, I got to really just like flex my creative muscle on this project here. And I also have no ownership of it. So it's just out living somewhere else and it's not my own thing. One of the very first things I did were at my previous job, the school district was, I think they still do actually, was buying like pre-movie trailers. So like if you go to the movie theater back when that was a thing that could happen, before the movie trailers begin, there's sort of like ads and like trivia things and whatever, like stuff playing. They would buy time there to promote, like, even if it was just sort of like brand awareness for the school district, like, hey, we're part of the community, this is what we're doing. Or even if it was to actually recruit, like, this is the community. Hey, here's all the programs that the high schools offer. If you want this program, go to this high school. If you want this program, go to this one. Wow, it's so cool. Those sorts of things. And I worked with students to like edit together a bunch of those one year. I think this was like summer of 2015, 14 maybe. And the first, we took a long time to finish it. We got everything edited, and then the district was going to have somebody record a voiceover. They had like a voiceover artist or something they had hired. And then it was like the first week of summer vacation, I got a call that was, this video's all done. We don't have a voiceover artist. Can you get a student to do a voiceover? And I was like, no, like it's summer. I'm not going to go meet up a kid and like record them in a parking lot or something. It's super weird. Yeah, like we're done. And then they said, well, could you just do it? I was like, sure. Like as soon as I finish this, then I'm done and I get to go on my summer break. So I, read the little script of like, this school district offers like arts and media entertainment programs, of all kinds, blah, 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 whatever. I don't remember the exact script. So I recorded my voiceover, which was very pre-YouTube. So it was literally getting my little like Zoom recorder and going in our guest bedroom and just trying to sound as good as I could and, adding it to the video and sending it in. They said, great, thank you. And then it was like 3 or 4 weeks later, we were going to the movies. I kind of forgot about this. And right as I was walking to the theater, I just heard my voice booming in the theater and immediately just turned super red and like wanted to leave, which of course nobody would hear a random voice because they weren't even paying attention to it, much less than be like, that's the guy whose voice we're hearing, like it's him right there. No, but it was just like the weirdest thing. I like forgot that people were going to hear that. And then we did several videos, but basically even though I left like a year later, so it must have been 2015. Yeah, I left like a year later. Those things still played for like 2 years. It was like after I didn't even work there anymore, people would like talk to me during the work week and be like, I was at the movies last weekend. Were you in like a video promoting this thing or talking about whatever? And I was like, yeah, that was me. Which was really like, that's fun. Like, that's actually a really cool thing. I'm like, that's a very fun thing. And I like that. But that is not my own creative voice. And what I found when the time came where I finally got that kick to start my own YouTube channel is I really struggled to find my own authentic voice, because those had been basically the only types of projects I had done for years and years. So I had all of the technical skill, but none of the like personal skill in a way. And my very first YouTube video is this video about how to get your commercial drone pilot's license, because I got my license, studying was really hard, and I just sort of realized, hey, I can make a video that's going to be helpful for people to study. And that was great because I had wanted to make a YouTube video, but I had no ideas. And this was like a real purpose. So if you're trying to start something and you just want to make your first thing, having a purpose behind it is huge, because then you don't need to worry about anything else. I just needed to communicate this info as clear as I could. And so I made the video, and it still gets watched. Like, it's a good video. Obviously, if you go back and watch it, it's very different than like a newer video, but at least you could kind of like, okay, it was me sharing some info about something I was interested in. That was cool. After that, though, I tried to make some other videos where I didn't have that clear purpose of this is like what I'm trying to communicate, maybe more vloggy style videos. And I found that since the only thing I had done was somebody else's projects, which being for a school district were very kind of bland and down the middle, I had no personality or anything to share or perspective, because it was all just that stuff. And it was really hard to like rediscover, or maybe for the first time, like discover what my on-camera presence could be like, or what my perspective is that I would want to share on my YouTube channel. And you could go, not that I would really recommend doing this, but you could go watch like the first video, second video, third video, and you can kind of see it build up and develop over time, which is something that anyone's going to have to do if you're making something, which is why I always push people like, just get started now, because you're going to have to go through that process no matter what, no matter how polished and great you might be now. You still have to go through that learning period. But it's very crucial, because then you discover who you are and what works for you. And then you can start just naturally. It sort of happens. You just bring in your personality, but then you maybe start to question things about what you want to bring in and what you don't want to bring in. For example, Peter Lindgren, who I have one of my other podcasts with, as if you don't know who Peter Lindgren is, he's like, he's a very popular YouTube creator, but he's from Sweden and his native language is Swedish. And he talks a lot about when he started his channel, he really didn't know, do I do it in Swedish? Do I do it in English? He wanted to do it in English because you have a bigger reach on a platform like YouTube if you speak English. But he was nervous because he has an accent and didn't speak English as well. And now, like several years later, he's regularly said that, doing his YouTube videos has helped him be a better English speaker. But also, he just had to learn that people were actually totally fine with him having an accent. Nobody was like, I'm not watching this video because this guy sounds like he's from Sweden because he's from Sweden. And if anything, that actually kind of makes him stand out a little bit from everybody else, because the photo video niche is very crowded. And, we've talked about this before on here. A lot of people kind of look a little bit the same. And so something like that actually makes you stand out in a unique way. And so this thing that he thought was going to be a detriment ended up being a benefit down the line. And that's the kind of stuff that you kind of just need to discover as you start making things on your own. But it's really important to bring those things in. And it's usually characteristics and traits you'll identify that separate you from the people who inspire you. So if there's someone who's really motivating to you and you want to do something the way that they're doing it, but you think, oh, I can't do that because I'm this way or because I do that, that's actually not a bad thing. That's a good thing, because then it comes down to, you can be inspired by that person, but then you have to filter whatever that is through your own, personality, and then you get something different out the other side. And that's what you want to do. Again, not trying to emulate, but trying to just be inspired by other people. And that's just something like I've had to learn, and it took a long time. I do, if you're familiar with my channel, I do a lot of review and tutorial style videos. There's a bunch of different ways to do that. Some people like to just review every new piece of gear that comes out. Some people like to get very specific and very technical, and they'll show you all kinds of scientific charts and graphs and things. And I'll watch some of those things sometimes, and I'll think like, I don't have access to all of like the newest and greatest stuff. I don't understand all the super technical stuff, and it's not even that. I'm actually just not even that interested in it. So what am I doing? And then, the thing that I am interested in is like how to utilize a lot of this stuff in a real practical situation where I don't want to be an expert in it. If I'm talking about a microphone, I don't want to be an expert in waveforms and sound engineering and all that kind of stuff. I just want like something that's going to work good and sound good and let me do what I need to do with it. And that's how I felt about it. And then I realized, because I felt that way, there's, of the 2 billion active users on that platform, other people felt that way too, which means when they see something that they relate to, they connect to it because it's authentic and it's relatable. And then that's what helps build a community and help grow your community, is just doing things your own way and not trying to do it the way somebody else does, not trying to compare it to somebody else. And then it kind of goes even further. One of the things that has helped my channel grow over the past year has been terribly great jokes, I should say, which is like, it's so silly because it's not even related to production value. It's not even related to like the topic of the thing that I'm talking about. But now it's like, it's sort of the thing that, it's one of the things, if not like the main thing that my channel is getting known for, are like these cheesy jokes and puns and stuff, which is completely fine with me because that's something I've done forever, is cheesy jokes and terrible puns and all that kind of stuff. The very first joke I ever heard, I remember it, like regular joke. I was like 4 years old, and my dad told me the classic, why was 6 afraid of 7? Because 7, 8, 9. And my mind was blown because I was like, the words you're saying sound like other things. There's like a different meaning. And that just, I have such a clear recollection of that moment with like my first like setup punchline style joke. And that's just something I've been drawn to, is like wordplay and puns and jokes. And I have always just loved that stuff. But when I started my YouTube channel, one of the things I was very self-conscious of was, yes, even though it's my channel, even though I am in the videos talking about what I want and making the videos that I want, I didn't want it to feel like the Tom show, like, hey, everybody, come watch me because I put myself on the internet. So it was like, I wanted it to be about the topic more than anything. And just knowing how I feel sometimes when I watch other videos and doing a lot of like how-to and review style things, people don't want to show up if they don't know you and hear all these things that are not relevant to what they come for. If you know somebody and you follow them and you're a fan of them, and then they make a video that's like how to, I don't know, get better audio out of your audio software, you might not mind like, oh, look, here's like a little like personal update and whatever, and now we'll get to the tutorial. That might not matter because you're familiar with them. But if you're somebody who's just showing up because you typed in like, I need how to fix audio, okay, this video comes up, click, and then it's just somebody not talking about how to fix audio, you're going to get very, very frustrated. And I was just always very conscious of that, especially when you're starting out and you're just growing, because that's one of the biggest ways that people will find you is, they search for a solution to a problem and you offer that solution, and they're not interested in who you are. They just want the info. But they can get that info anywhere, and that is important. So even very much still, the number one thing I try to do in any video is like whatever the purpose is of that video, whatever I'm trying to communicate or express, that's the number one thing. Like I try as quickly as possible without giving you whiplash to just jump into that topic. So literally, I don't know if you know this or not, but you can press, at least on a computer, when you start a YouTube video, you can press the number 3 and it will take you 33% of the way through the video. And the reason for that is because semi-statistically, most YouTube videos don't actually dive into the topic until about 33% of the way through it. So if you jump into a tutorial like how to clean a drain or whatever, press 3 and then you skip the person's like long-winded intro and you get into how to clean a drain. I try to set up my videos where if somebody does that, they have to go back because they missed the info because I didn't spend a whole bunch of time talking about something irrelevant. We just dived right into the actual topic. I still think that's really important. I still like doing that, but the info that I'm sharing is not info that is like proprietary to me or exclusive to me. Anyone else can, know these things, can experiment with things and share these opinions. I mean, heck, like half the stuff that's on my channel, there's very similar videos on other channels, similar comparisons, similar reviews, similar, tutorials, whatever. So what I had to realize down the line was it's not just about making these videos good. Anyone can make a good video. It's what can I do to make these videos mine? Like what is my spin on these things? And it's so crazy. I know we've talked about this before, but just how this fits in, because in my personal life, like just with friends and family and stuff, I make jokes a lot and use a lot of like puns and super cheesy, like terrible jokes. And in my classroom for years, for a decade, I've ended every class with like a joke of the day. And, students, that's become like the main thing at the end of like 4 years with me. When students write their like thank you, goodbye letters, they like always mention the joke. And I'm like, what about like the stuff that you learned, all those hours? And like the joke's really funny. And I'm like, okay. But there's something else there. It's not because the joke is good, but there's sort of like this goofy, there's just something about it that some people can really connect with. And I realized I do this in my personal life. I do this in my professional life, but my YouTube channel, the thing that I specifically created to be myself and to share myself, I don't do this because I'm scared of people being upset that they're not just getting only the topic they came for. And then it became a creative challenge to go, okay, how can I bring these things into it without upsetting those kinds of people? And that to me is actually a really fun creative challenge. So then, okay, every video needs 1 or 2 at least puns of some kind, if not just a classic setup punchline cheesy joke that is relevant to the topic. It's not just sort of like, out of nowhere, how do you plan for a party in space? You plan it. And I'm talking about like a camera lens or something, but like really sort of related to what if it's a camera video that I'm doing, then some sort of camera related pun, which isn't something that you can Google. I mean, sort of you could, but for the most part, like talking about things that are really specific. So I have to sit there and try to spend like way too much time coming up with a joke or a pun and then how to incorporate it into stuff. And it's a whole process, but it's really fun and people seem to really connect with it and really enjoy it. And that is one of like, surprisingly enough, that has been one of the things for me that has helped grow my channel like the most over the past year is that, because that's a huge part of my personality. And I think it's not even just that people like goofy jokes, but by putting those in there, it naturally just brings out more of my personality. So instead of being just sort of a dry, tutorial video, open the program and click on the thing and do whatever, there's personality there and there's something a little bit different there and people connect to that and people relate to that. And that doesn't mean that you now need to do cheesy jokes in your videos or your podcasts or whatever, but if there's that thing, if you're somebody who has an accent, if you're somebody who watches a lot of really upbeat, YouTubers, podcasters, but your natural way of being is kind of like mellow and laid back, it does not mean you need to exhaust yourself by trying to be super upbeat so that you can look like and sound like the people that you watch. Your thing might be to be ultra mellow and laid back. And then there's going to be a whole bunch of people who connect with you because they love watching your mellow, laid back videos or listening to your laid back podcasts. And that's going to be one of the things that helps you connect with other people. So it doesn't have to look the same. The way I'm authentic and the way you're authentic might look entirely different, but the key is that's what's going to make whatever we're creating sustainable, and that's going to let us keep going, way into the foreseeable future. And it's funny because it actually reminds me, maybe like 2 weeks ago, I was out on a bike ride because I've been trying to take a lot more bike rides lately. And when I started cycling and started riding my bike, my big thing was like, I'm never going to wear the bike gear, the shorts and the tight, the spandex. No. And then, I got into cycling in 2012. And it was summer of 2012. By fall of 2012, I had the full-on, cycling kit. Just because piece by piece, I had learned the value of those things. Oh, it actually kind of sucks to ride in a cotton shirt that's, flapping in the wind and collecting all your sweat and all this stuff. And, regular shorts are very uncomfortable and can get caught in your chain or in your wheels or whatever. And look, my clunky everyday shoes aren't as nice as these shoes that connect in and clip into the pedals. And just piece by piece I had to learn all that stuff. So even though I have my road bike and my cycling kit and my little computer that tells me how fast I'm going, what that computer tells me is that I'm usually going not that fast. But one thing that is very popular in the world of road cycling is to go as fast and as far as you can, beat your record. That's a huge part of it, but it's not something I'm interested in really at all. I like it if I ride my bike consistently, you can see, hey, it used to take me an hour to go this far and now it takes me 40 minutes. That's really cool progress. It's like going to the gym and just working out and you're like, oh, I used to only be able to lift this much weight. Now I can lift this much. Cool. But you're not necessarily trying to be a world champion bodybuilder and lift as much weight as humanly possible. And the reason I bring this up is because oftentimes other cyclists will see me on the road and I look like the same way that a typical maybe competitive road cyclist might look, except that I'm not at all. And so they, whiz by me going way faster than me. And that's a very common thing. It's fine. I'm cool with it. But the other day I was riding my bike and I didn't even know there was someone behind me. And I was riding and came up to a red light. So I came and stopped at a red light. And then suddenly I looked over and there was just another guy next to me, on his bike. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't even realize there was someone behind me. And he caught up and it was just very quick. And then the light changed and we went off and he just, so much faster than me. I don't know if it was on purpose to show me how fast he was or anything. But I just kind of kept up my pace. And then he was just, becoming a smaller and smaller dot off into the distance until went around a corner and I couldn't see him anymore. And I just had this thought of at first I was kind of annoyed. I'm not going to lie. I was just that's come on, dude. Who are you impressing? And then I was like, okay, it's not like he gave me the finger or anything. He was just riding his bike. I was irrelevant to his experience. But what I thought and what was interesting was, oh, you know what? We're both doing kind of the same thing. We're both riding bikes. We both are wearing the same gear. We have the same equipment. We're doing the same basic thing. We're out, pedaling this thing around these streets. But the way we're doing it is very different. And I had the thought of, if you told me, while riding my bike is really fun, I'd love to do it. I wish I could do it even more. If you told me that I had to ride my bike the way he was riding it, okay, you can ride your bike, but you have to go as fast as you can. You have to go as far as you can. You have to really push yourself and, exert every bit of energy you have. I would definitely not ride it as often because that does not sound like fun to me. But then I think the opposite would also be true because I have a feeling that guy was having a really fun time on his bike doing his thing. And if you told him, no, you got to just kind of pedal around, like this guy over here going a little bit slower, he'd probably be okay, and get really bored of riding his bike and want to go do something else. So I found that interesting because even though we were doing the same thing, we were doing it in our own ways that best suited us. And if we switched, if I had to do it his way and he had to do it my way, we probably wouldn't enjoy it the same. And that to me was just such a good analogy for anything like YouTube or podcasts or whatever, where you can see other people doing it and then you show up and you're doing it. And sometimes you think, well, I should be doing it the way they're doing it because, maybe they're more successful. Maybe they have a bigger audience. Maybe they've been doing it longer. But I want to do things this way. Just because nobody else is doing things the way you're doing them doesn't mean you should not do it that way. Obviously, sometimes that might be the case. If nobody else is lighting their hair on fire, it doesn't mean you should light your hair on fire. But if you're kind of happy with the path that you're going, or you want to do something a certain way, and it doesn't seem to be the way that everybody else is doing it, I think that that's not only a key towards your own personal authenticity, but it's also something really special to stumble upon, because that's going to make you stand out a little bit more, doing things your way, not just the way that everybody else is doing it. And so just because you're doing something that other people have done or are doing does not mean it needs to look and feel exactly the way that they're doing it. And just because somebody else tells you, this is what I'm doing, this is what you need to do, does not mean you have to do that either. If I know I've experienced this, and maybe you have too, as you start to build anything online, it doesn't really matter if you have a YouTube channel with 10 subscribers or 10,000 or whatever. Eventually, people who have larger reaches will talk to you, and they will offer oftentimes unsolicited advice. And they will tell you, yeah, you need to do this thing for sure. Just do this right here, right now. And sometimes that can be helpful. Like going back to Peter Lindgren, who has a channel, 380,000 subscribers larger than mine, something like that. We're friends more than like YouTubers. So he has this experience, and as my friend, he might say, hey, have you ever thought about blah, blah, blah? And I'll go, oh yeah, I've been thinking about it, or no, I don't really want to do that. But that's more of like a friendship discussion. Sometimes you'll find people where it's like, yes, they do have a larger audience, they don't know you, and then they will just tell you what they did. Oh, you're doing this? Now what you need to do is be as extreme as possible on camera and be just totally outrageous, and that's what's going to pull people in. You need to clickbait people. You need to whatever, all these other things. And you might go, but I don't like those things. I don't want to do those things. And say, no, that's the only way you can do it. The only way you can grow. I would kind of caution against feeling obligated to follow that advice and just stick with what you know. If you know, well, the thing I'm doing feels more authentic to me, do that. That person just isn't your audience. If they're telling you that essentially they're not interested in what you're making, that's fine. That probably also means there are people who are interested in what you're making, because there's never going to be a time where everybody everywhere loves what you're doing. So the fact that somebody doesn't might actually mean that it's more likely there are people who do. It's kind of like if you're trying to please everyone, you're going to please nobody. So I don't know if I made that, I don't know if that makes sense or not, but the fact that someone doesn't like the way you're doing something probably gives you a greater likelihood that there are people out there who do. And I'm predicating this on the idea that what you're doing isn't terrible. Like, if something you're making is objectively awful, then yes, maybe you need to like reconfigure a little bit. If you're like spewing hatred and all this terrible stuff, yeah, maybe that's not something I want to promote. Maybe don't be your authentic self if your authentic self is like terrible. But I'm sure that it isn't. If you've made it 54 minutes into this podcast, you're probably not like a white supremacist or something. So I don't think I have to worry about like promoting these terrible ideas. It just comes down to, it's this tricky thing of you want guidance when you're making your own thing, but you also want to make your own thing. But the very fact that you're doing something that you've never done before, and because you're the only you there is, doesn't really mean there's a one-to-one guide of how to do it. You kind of do have to go off into this uncharted territory and figure it out as best you can. And even though we're all using these same platforms, doing the same basic thing, our experience and our goals and our what is authentic to us is going to look and feel very differently. That can be scary and confusing, but I think it's also really, really cool, and it's really exciting, and that's one of my favorite parts of these platforms. So as you go on to create your stuff, just whatever it is that makes you in terms of your personality, embrace that, lean into it, and find ways to bring that into what you're making, even if it's not something you've seen somewhere else, especially if it's not something you've seen somewhere else. So I hope that that is a helpful look at this idea of authenticity, which is something that's so important to me and something that something that lacks oftentimes in our world, but platforms like YouTube and, you know, the ability to create something like a podcast is such an awesome opportunity to just bring back some of that authenticity and share it with the world. And that is really exciting. So I hope you have a terrific week. If you have thoughts about this, I'd love to hear them. If you want to leave a message, anchor.fm/enthusiasm. You can always reach out to me at SoDarnTom. Links, of course, are all in the descriptions. YouTube videos, new ones every week, youtube.com/TomBuck. Thank you, as always, for spending your time with me. Really appreciate that. Hope you have a terrific week, and I will see you next time.